Hey everyone, this is Laura Slade, and in today's lesson, we are going to walk the thin line between biology and chemistry. We're going to be discussing something called redox reactions. Now, this is absolutely a chemistry topic. In fact, you can spend a whole unit on it in Chemistry 30. But redox reactions are involved in so many biological processes, including metabolic reactions, that as biologists, we also need to understand the general process behind redox reactions so that we can talk about biology concepts. So today we're going to find out what redox reactions are and what role they play in metabolism, looking at photosynthesis as a case study. So it turns out that chemical reactions are all about electrons. We know that electrons sit on the outside of the spherical surface of an atom, and therefore it's the electrons, particularly the electrons in the outside ring called the valence electrons, those are what are going to interact with each other in chemical reactions, including in the metabolic reactions that we're going to be discussing today. Now, electrons cannot exist independently. You will never find an electron just floating around in space. They're always going to be attached to an atom. So in this case, we're seeing two atoms. The nucleus in the center of each atom contains protons and neutrons, and the electrons fill this kind of outside shell around each atom, and these electrons, they each carry a negative charge. Now, electrons, and in particular the ability to move electrons, actually counts as a form of energy. And you'll know that this is true if you've ever used electricity. So electricity is the process of moving electrons. The reactions we're going to talk about today can also generate power based on the movement of electrons. Now, when we talk about atoms exchanging electrons between them, we're going to call those reduction reactions and oxidation reactions. And we'll discuss the difference between these two processes in just a second. But first of all, let's find out where this word redox comes from. It's a combination of the word reduction, that's the RE part, and oxidation, that's the OX part. So let's find out what happens in a redox reaction. What we're going to see in a redox reaction is that one atom or one molecule will lose an electron. But remember that electron cannot just go floating off in space. It's got to be attached to an atom. So at the same time, a different atom is going to accept that electron. The process of losing an electron is called oxidation, whereas the process of gaining an electron is called reduction. And we can help remember which of these processes is which by using a simple memory technique. And that is the expression oil-Rig. So oil stands for oxidation is loss. Oxidation involves the loss of an electron. Rig stands for reduction is gain. So a reduction is the gain of an electron. So when our first atom here loses its electron, in other words, when it is oxidized or undergoes oxidation, something else has to be reduced because that electron has to go somewhere. What we can say then is that atoms that undergo oxidation have reducing power. They can cause something else to undergo reduction by gaining the electron they've lost. And similarly, molecules or atoms that undergo reduction, they're stealing an electron from somewhere, which means that when they get reduced, they're causing something else to be oxidated. We can say that they have oxidizing power. And once again, you'll notice that oxidation and reduction are completely tied together. They must coexist. We can't have one without the other. So let's use a case study of a metabolic reaction to discuss redox reactions in biological systems. And we're going to talk about the redox reactions that are present in photosynthesis. So as a quick rundown, let's look at what happens in photosynthesis. What's going to happen first is that energy from the sunlight is used to actually capture an electron from a water molecule. And this process happens in the thylakoid membrane of a chloroplast. Now, when water loses an electron, that means it is oxidized. Remember, oxidation is loss. This process summarizes what is happening in the light-dependent reaction of photosynthesis, which is the first stage in photosynthesis to occur. Next, that electron that we get from water in the light-dependent reaction is going to go on and be used to make a glucose molecule. Remember, electrons have power. That power can be harnessed to produce a larger molecule. And that process happens in the stroma of the chloroplast. That's that liquid space inside the chloroplast that surrounds the thylakoids. And if glucose is going to gain this electron in the process, that means it is reduced. Remember, reduction is gain of electron. This summarizes what's happening in the light-independent reaction in photosynthesis, which is the second half of the photosynthesis process. So you can think of it like this. In the light-dependent reaction, an electron is being harvested. Power is being generated from sunlight. So it's almost like the thylakoid membrane is a solar power plant. It's generating electrical power by freeing up this electron. In that case, we can think of the light-independent reaction as a factory that's actually using that energy to make its product, to produce glucose. But we need some way to transport the energy made in our solar power plant to the factory where it's actually being used. In our analogy, this would be a set of power lines hooked up from the power plant to the factory. In the cell, the way that we transport electrons from the light-dependent reaction to the light-independent reaction is with a molecule called NADPH. Now, you don't have to remember the whole name of this molecule. It's ridiculously long. This is an acronym that will make it easy for us to talk about. And NADPH is a molecule that is going to be involved in redox reactions. That means that it can gain and lose electrons. And that's what allows it to transport an electron from the light-dependent reaction to the light-independent reaction. So let's take a closer look at how this functions. We are going to start with a molecule of NADP+. It is going to pick up the electron lost by water in the light-dependent reaction. If it gains an electron, that means it is reduced. So NADP+ becomes reduced to form NADPH. And NADPH is just the other version of this molecule that has an electron attached to it. Now, NADPH is free to travel about the cell, carrying its extra electron. And it can carry it all the way to the light-independent reaction, where it will then lose its electron to the Calvin cycle in the process of making glucose. Now, when NADPH loses an electron, it becomes oxidized to form NADP+. Well, what do we know NADP+ can do? It can go over to the light-dependent reaction, pick up an electron, and become reduced. And this process can go around and around with NADPH constantly bringing an electron from the light-dependent reaction to the light-independent reaction, and then going back. Another way to describe this is to think of NADPH as a bucket full of water. In this case, the electron is represented by water. So a full bucket describes NADPH as it travels from the light-dependent reaction to the light-independent reaction. Dumps out its water, becoming NADP+, and the empty bucket comes back. The purpose of bringing back the empty bucket is so that we can fill it up again, grab another electron, and bring it to the factory where glucose is produced in the light-independent reaction. Now, photosynthesis is not the only metabolic reaction where we see these redox reactions occurring. A very similar process happens during cellular respiration. In fact, it happens with a very similar molecule. There are just a few small changes in the shape of our bucket, and so we call it NADH. When NADH is oxidized, it becomes NAD+, and then it's reduced by picking up an electron to become NADH again. And in the case of cellular respiration, the NADH molecule is picking up an electron from the Krebs cycle of cellular respiration and bringing it to the electron transport chain, which is going to produce energy in the form of ATP, and that'll be the product of our factory. Now there's just one more thing I want to point out about the structure of NAD plus and NADH. Or we could be talking about NADPH and NADP plus. These observations will apply whether it's cellular respiration or photosynthesis that we're discussing. Now what we want to notice is that the main important difference between NAD plus and NADH is that NADH has gained an extra electron. So then the question becomes, where does the H come from? Well, here, H is the atomic symbol for hydrogen. And what we'll notice is that hydrogen ions, in other words, a hydrogen ion that carries a charge, they exist naturally in the cell. In particular, they carry a positive charge, and they're represented by H+. And what we know is true in chemistry, as well as biology perhaps, is that opposites attract. So if this hydrogen ion has a positive charge, then it's going to be attracted to something that is negatively charged. And when NAD plus takes on an electron, it takes on the negative charge of that electron. So NAD plus becomes more negative. This hydrogen ion is going to be attracted to the more negative version of NAD, and it's basically going to hitch a ride. So when the positive and negatively charged species are attracted to each other, they're going to hang out, and that's why the H gets added on to NAD's name. So hopefully this gives you a better idea about how electrons are involved in the redox reactions that we find in metabolism, and the way that molecules like NADPH and NAD+ operate in metabolic systems to help connect reactions. They connect the reaction where the electron is produced to the reaction where the electron is used. And they do this by undergoing consecutive reduction and oxidation reactions. Hopefully that helps, and I'll see you guys next time.